Doom. And also Quake, but Doom was one of those games that was like a huge step for its genre, and I used that one clip from Friends where they're talking about Doom, but this is the best I have. Doom took what Ed had previously established with Wolfenstein 3D and the other one in creating an FPS and developed it in Doom to make it less clunky. Instead of being a labyrinth of confusing corridors, it had proper levels with verticality, clever puzzling design and a clear sense of atmosphere. Instead of running into the same few enemies and trading bullets for a few seconds, Doom had various enemy types, each attacking the player with a different method of offense. And instead of the music sounding like kind of gamey and it had actual music that sounded like it could be released on a CD. Mostly because it was. You play these old DOS games and they feel like old DOS games. It's all awkward and weird, and I feel like my dad's gonna kick me off to play solitaire for his YouTube channel again. Oh, here he is, in fact, he's just letting himself in.
I want a shot on your computer.
But Doom, despite coming out around the same time as these games, feels unlike anything seen before. It's a rare moment in games or media in general where it's like staring into the future. Oh, I'm moving my arms around right now, but you can't see it. I'm gonna stop. Quake's okay too, I guess. I don't have much to say, it's 3D in it. That's cool. James Pond Robocod though. So Quake is often referred to as one of those classic games that you just don't get anymore. Don't exist, ever. It's up there with Doom, but it's never really without Doom though. Like, I've seen plenty of Doom fans, people who are obsessed with those games, but I never see that for Quake. Or I do, but like, from people who also love Doom. So through methods of prayer and sacrifice, we're going to work out why this is. So first of all, you'll need exactly 666 milliliters of human blood. The signs of Doom's influence on Quake are apparent from very early on, namely the development of the first game. The game was supposed to show the capabilities of a new 3D game engine and so was kind of developed alongside it. The problem with that is that plenty concepts were completely abandoned. In a 1994 issue of Computer Gaming World, Quake is mentioned, saying it would have you becoming a Thor-like god with a mighty hammer. Then the next page is a huge Doom advert. This is reiterated in the next month's issue, July 1994, the article being about a writer's tour of the id Software offices. The bit about Quake further describes the Thor concept along with mentions of the enemy types following a similar style. It also mentions multiplayer and John Romero being a very happy boy. However, it just mentions it as it was very early in development and the rest of this 5-page article is made up of. And then this concept isn't really seen again until a 1996 issue of Maximum, which asks Jay Wilbur what happened to it, to which he mentions that the Thor concept just wasn't very fun. But the Quake wiki tells it differently, saying the development team were just getting kind of tired of Quake after the engine was finished and wanted to finish the game as soon as possible, thus going the route of just kind of making Doom again. Which apparently also annoyed John Romero due to his previous enthusiasm for the Thor concept. You can believe either story. Personally, I am a gossip bitch, but whatever happens, development continued, with Quake being an FPS designed similarly to Doom, and released June 22nd, 1986 in North America. The original game looks like this, but if I just do this with Quake Spasm, then... Okay, there we go. So in Quake, the plot is that the government created a portal that was taken over by Quake, which was sending death squads into the human realm to, I guess, upset the humans. You then go from level to collect runes, and once you've gotten all 4 runes, you fight Quake. So there is a plot, but I wouldn't blame you if you didn't notice. There's no sense of connection between levels. Doom at least gave you a map to show where you were and where you were going, but here levels feel just like that. Levels. I guess plot is there, but it's not a major thing. When you start, you go through one of 3 portals to select the difficulty, and then go through 4 episodes and a final boss. Boss being in huge quotation marks. There is one boss at the end of the first episode, where you walk on 3 buttons while avoiding easily dodgeable projectiles. It's over in seconds. The final boss, however, is directly after the 4th episode, and it makes me have an actual episode. Throughout the game you hear about Shub-Niggurath, which is an unfortunate name, but I'm sure this Lovecraft guy isn't racist, we can trust him. When you enter a level, you see this indescribable creature and assume that's the final boss. After fighting through a hallway of the toughest enemies the game has to offer, you approach the creature and the game just kind of ends. Like, there's no fight or anything. Moving on. I like the graphics quite a bit. The early 3D along with the gothic style comes off as kinda charming, and there isn't much like it, including stuff that directly tries to replicate it. It's all 3D and detailed, but it's still kinda pixely. Like a lot of 3D games from this era, the colours just kinda blend together and it looks like this big mush, but this looks kinda sharp and nice. I like it a lot. And the monster designs are all kinda faceless and creepy. It's really nice. Or not nice, but like, I don't want to say I like it a lot again, so... The music's a change of pace. I kinda like it, but it's kinda scary and doesn't really fit the tone of the overall game. In fact, that goes for the entire presentation. You can tell the Doom-esque gameplay was decided after the graphic style and music were decided, because you get a really weird contrast between the fast, intense gameplay and the dark, scary presentation. So the gameplay, as I mentioned, is very similar to Doom. You're dropped into a level and have to find your way out by collecting keycards and shooting the bad people. There's 8 weapons: a shotgun, a double-barreled shotgun, a nail gun, a super nail gun, a grenade launcher, a rocket launcher, the thunderbolt, and an axe, which doesn't look like an axe. As far as I can tell, the double-barreled shotgun and super nail gun are just upgraded versions of the shotgun and nail gun. The original shotgun is a little more accurate, which can be nice when you have to shoot buttons and have very little ammo, I guess, but apart from that, once you get the upgraded versions, there's little reason to use the original versions. The grenade launcher and rocket launcher could also go under this category, but I didn't mention them because they're a little more complicated. I'm not sure if they do different damage from each other, but I know that the grenade launcher shoots in an arc whilst the rocket launcher shoots straight. You'll use the rocket launcher more if you have it, but the grenade launcher still has its uses. Since the grenade takes a moment to explode if it doesn't directly hit a target and bounces off walls, it can often be used to attack enemies in awkward areas. For example, this part where a shambler is below you, hitting it directly with a rocket could be difficult, so you can just drop grenades near it. It's a clever use of the 3D space and the weapon design, which would have been interesting to see more of. The shotgun and the nail gun act very similar to their Doom counterparts, this being the chain gun for the nail gun, and the thunderbolt acts similar to the glue-on gun from Half-Life. It's a continuously firing beam that does high damage to enemies. The grenade launcher also has its uses over the rocket launcher, as it's easier to avoid the splash damage of the grenades. When firing the rocket launcher in close range, you will often be hit by splash damage, maybe even too often, but this means that in more long-range fights the rocket launcher has its use over the grenade launcher, as you don't need to be nearly as accurate. There is a fair amount of focus on these two weapons, as you seem to get more ammo for them than any other weapon, and they work in much more interesting ways to the other weapons. They require you to consider your entire environment and fire in specific ways that might not be as obvious, and while there was a rocket launcher in Doom, I feel Quake uses it more effectively. The other weapons feel a bit too similar to me. Both the nail guns and the thunderbolt are completely automatic, and the shotgun may as well be, since you can just hold down fire and it goes pretty fast. They'll each do different damage, but if I run out of nail gun ammo and have to switch to the shotgun, I won't be crying for that long, at least relative to how long I usually cry. There's also free power-ups.
Force damage. Pentagram of protection.
And
The Ring of Shadows.
Or in terms that aren't scary, you do a lot of damage, you're invincible, and you're invisible. Don't get those last two mixed up. They're okay, they're satisfying to use when you get them and change things up a little. There's also a bit of strategy in using them since they run on a timer. In terms of enemies, there are the grunts, enforcers, ogres, fiends, rotfish, rottweilers, scrags, zombies, shamblers, knights, Death Knights, Spawn, and most importantly,
Vor.
most of these enemies have incredibly clear attacks. As far as I can tell, the only hitscan enemies are the grunts and the shamblers, and even then the shamblers have a very clear animation before they attack. The others have attacks that can be dodged through fast movement, often turning Quake into a first-person bullet hell, which is affected heavily by the environments it takes place in. Environments that can range from open spaces where you're free to hop around, dodging the fire of multiple enemies, to enclosed areas where you have to get worryingly close to enemies. Enemies don't attack with exclusively bullet hell-esque attacks. I just dodge one bullet and think, it's like Crimson Clover, it's the exact same. While the Death Knights attack in an arc of small projectiles, others fire more with precise single shots. Ogres fire grenades similar to your own, fiends dive towards you, and Vors fire a kind of lock-on attack that will attack you directly unless you get a wall between you and it. This bullet hell-like design means that higher difficulties can feel entirely fair even when they overload you with enemies, since most attacks can be avoided and you can come out of even the hardest fights mostly unscathed. Quick note too, play this on hard. I've played it a few times on normal, and as much as people claim this is a really difficult game, it's not. You might run low on ammo on hard, but I never ran out, and it's not so hard that it's impossible. It's a good challenge, but I'd use occasional quick saves because playing entire levels again just isn't fun. Along with the projectile attacks, a lot of enemies have a melee attack they'll use when they get close. It's risky, but if you get close to tougher enemies, it is possible to dodge these melee attacks and avoid having to deal with trickier to dodge ranged attacks. This is probably most notable on the Shamblers, who can cut off a huge chunk of your health if you're not behind cover when they attack. Tricking them into using melee can make things easier, however for other enemies quick varied movements works better. The combat works really well. Its clear and varied enemy attacks require you to use movements in ways you don't see often in FPS games, and the environments make a substantial difference to combat, again in ways you don't see often in FPS games. One small problem is with the spawn enemies. Through the way they're placed in levels, I'm assuming these guys are meant to be small, easy to kill cannon fodder, but they make some areas of the final chapter a complete slog. Unlike the other enemies, they don't have a clear attack. Instead, they jump around at complete random, making them incredibly difficult to hit, whilst they deal out a large amount of damage. They only appear in the final chapter, however the way they're used makes them really annoying, with the game often filling entire rooms with them. Aside from that though, Quake is a very fun, well-designed game that, despite being a really early 3D FPS, used that 3D space incredibly well. It's Doom though. The art style's different and the game plays a bit differently, but it feels almost like an adaptation of Doom's gameplay. It uses keycards, similar weapons, similar enemies, it has a similar structure. It's Doom, and they even admitted it. That's fine, I'd say they're known for fast-paced FPS games, so if they wanted to be Platinum but with FPS games, and before Platinum, that's great, but Platinum's games are stylistically completely different and play pretty differently. Mostly. You couldn't get Mad World mixed up with Bayonetta, but you could get Quake mixed up with Doom. And that answers our question, the video's done. Well, okay, QuakeCon is similar to Doom, but it's been 23 years since it released, and since then it's become a series, so it must have changed a bit. QuakeCon was pretty successful, but they didn't make a sequel. Except, they did? Quake 2 doesn't have much to do with Quake 1, the only reason they took the name was because they play similar. The previous Lovecraftian style is gone, the previous plot is gone, the previous soundtrack is gone, but I mean gone, so like, it was originally meant to be completely disconnected from Quake, like a whole new IP. It was made with no interest in prolonging the success of Quake, so why did they make it? I couldn't find much about Quake 2's development, and when scrolling through articles about Quake 2 I kept getting phrases like OpenGL, processor, id Software. Like, what does that mean? From what I can tell, Quake 2 is about creating a more immersive and believable game. Articles focus on its AI, engine and levels rather than changing the gameplay itself. The story's still fairly basic though, in fact it's even more basic than Quake 1. It's basically aliens are shooting humans, so you and other marines shoot them. Then the aliens shoot all the marines apart from you. Then you shoot the aliens. I know Ed in this era thought that story didn't matter, but I don't know, Doom was at least tongue-in-cheek, this is just kinda dull. Also, the presentation's kinda weird. The graphics are all brown and industrial, but the music is this aggressive metal. It feels like if you swapped the music for this in the first game, it would make more sense in both instances. Maybe I'm wrong though, because the music works well. It was proven to work with previous FPS games, but it still works and gives an extra bit of energy to the game. The graphics on the other hand is where I'm a bit more mixed. On a technical side it looks great, everything is really smooth and detailed, especially when compared to other games from this time. But artistically it's so brown. I know Quake 1 was brown, but it's called being a goth, Dad. Right, it wouldn't really make sense to have tons of amazing colours in what is otherwise going for a gothic art style, apart from that one bit where it just isn't. The entire game has you going through brown industrial buildings, which would be fine for a bit, but it goes on for the whole 8 hours. There's so much you can do with this, and the game is divided into these separately named areas, almost like worlds in Mario or something, but they stick to this exact same looking area for so long, it's boring. Some of the enemy designs are kinda cool. I thought parasites were just dogs for a while, but then I looked at the model properly and what the fuck. Like, the characters mostly seem to be regular humans that have been all twisted and destroyed. It's cool. I sound like such a psycho when I talk about this stuff, what the fuck? Things like that makes me feel kind of rubbish when I say that the game looks bad, because it doesn't really. Someone put effort into this, and then they got bored and put all their time into the backgrounds because, like, whoa. Anyway, you progress through the game fairly differently to Quake. Instead of having the 4 episodes, which was popular with most FPS games at the time, Quake 2 just has you going through one long campaign made up of 10 huge levels that are split into smaller sections. These levels are okay, they feel like actual locations rather than levels, which is nice, and this was a big unique thing the game had to stand out, but they are kinda difficult to navigate at times due to the samey graphics I mentioned earlier. In this one area, I think it was like the research station or something, there were 3 lifts that were literally identical. This led to me running in a lot of circles for this huge level with no idea what to do, and the rest of the game doesn't really help. Objectives are unclear, saying things like find functioning data spinner in outer courts, with no explanation of what a data spinner is. I was often met with text like, you do not have access to the toxic waste dump, which is fine, I don't even care really. I didn't even want to go to toxic waste dumps, stupid. To make it more immersive, it's also less common to get the blue key for the blue door, and instead you find things like the data disk, which, I mean, I can't lie, I love the data disk, it's really cool, but what the fuck is it? There's no kind of map, and usually no signs to tell you where things are, and it's never unfair. You never have a moment where it's telling you to shoot a random wall or something, but it can break the pace a bit and stop the combat for just walking. It is ambitious though, especially since this came out before Half-Life. It's just, now it gets in the way more than it's impressive. In fact, I feel like it caused some issues elsewhere because my experience of the gameplay went from bad to good to okay. In all the FPS games that used episodes, it would be like starting a whole new game each time you started a new episode. You'd lose all your weapons and the more powerful enemies would become less common. But here, since you keep your weapons throughout the whole game, and once an enemy is introduced it'll stay for the rest of the game, it ends up with some kind of pacing problems. At the start of the game, you're stuck with guns that are incredibly weak and they're used against hit-scan enemies. This was the same for Quake 1, but hit-scan enemies very quickly became less common. In fact, this only lasts for like the first level of Quake 1. In Quake 2 though, it can go on for like an hour, so much time is spent waiting for it to unlock the fun parts of the game. But once the game introduces the better enemies and once you have a much more varied loadout, it becomes kind of fun. It's like Quake. You dodge through the assault of enemies while shooting them with weak but satisfying weapons, except now there's more weapons. You have the shotgun and super shotgun, grenade launcher and rocket launcher, and the machine gun and chain gun which replaced the nail guns in Quake 1, but you also have a railgun, a hyper blaster, hand grenades on their own, and a BFG, like the one in Doom. Apart from the hand grenades, which are pretty much useless without the launcher, these weapons are all fun to use and have their own separate function. The railgun acts as a sort of sniper, the BFG is the BFG, and the hyper blaster actually acts more like the nail gun than the chain gun does. It feels like you're supposed to chain kills together with this quickly, whilst the hyper blaster is slower and just feels like a gun. This goes for the shotgun as well, by the way. As I mentioned, in Quake 1 it felt like the shotgun and nail gun were kind of similar, but here the shotgun has a slower fire rate and wider spread, separating it from the machine gun. The combat feels good, it feels more fleshed out than the original. It's just a shame that it only feels better around the middle, because of what I mentioned about the start and the fact the end really likes to use the hit-scan enemies, which are made incredibly easy due to the expanded arsenal you'd have by then. Here's the thing, I kind of like Quake 2. I think it's fun and the changes it makes from Quake 1 are impressive for 1997. The expanded arsenal is cool, the graphics are ahead of their time, the level design is more immersive, and these are all pretty good things, but, and I know this sounds really dumb, but here in 2019 I just don't care. I was also playing Assassin's Creed Origins at the same time I was playing Quake 2. I know you can't really compare these, but Assassin's Creed Origins takes place in this one huge seamless representation of ancient Egypt. So going back to Quake 2 and saying, wow, it has kind of big levels that are split up by loading screens is difficult, especially when its attempts at innovating get in the way of the actual game. I don't want this to come off as don't innovate because in a few years no one will care. Quake 2 is good, it uses technology to try new things even when everyone is staring at what they're trying. It's just that it's kinda shit. Like Quake 2 came out in 1997, the same year as Shadow Warrior and Bloods, and while this is a way more technologically advanced game than then, now I'd just rather play either of those. Oh, and in terms of carving its own identity, they brought back the BFG and the Metal soundtrack. How do you think it tried to stand out from Doom in its multiplayer? Oh wait, what I haven't actually mentioned is the overwhelming popularity both Quake 1 and 2's multiplayer mods had. In fact, Quake 1 single player was criticised for not feeling like it had evolved that much since Doom, when other FPS games from the time had included much more interactivity in their environments and evolved how writing can give the games their own personality. However, Quake was apparently one of the first games you could play over a TCP/IP connection, meaning they could be played with anyone online rather than just people over LAN. This meant plenty of people people played Quake for its multiplayer alone, and thus Quake 2 was also played this way, being the most popular online game in 1998, just in general. So with people focusing on the multiplayer of these games rather than the single player, so they did. In 1999 Quake 3 was released, which is almost multiplayer only. I say almost because there is a single player, it's just that single player is made up of normal death matches with bots. The bot matches are decent. I didn't analyse the bots deeply or anything, but the only issue I had was a fairly common one of their unnatural aiming. This is a problem with a lot of FPS bots, but the bots in this are incredibly accurate and won't panic or anything like a human player would. It doesn't cause many problems, but it did affect one level for me, a 1v1 with an easy to attain lightning gun. The lightning gun is a highly damaging and continuously firing beam, which was incredibly difficult to fight considering the accuracy of the bot. This meant that to win, I just had to rush the lightning gun and keep the bot in a loop of dying to keep it from getting the lightning gun. Aside from that, the bot matches are a perfectly fine way to play the game. In fact, they may be preferable since fighting a server can be, the server list looks like this. There's no way to tell if the server you're joining is filled with bots, if it uses a custom map you don't have, or if it uses mods that will take 20 minutes to download. But you can get into a match with other players, who brag about their CPU while using it to play a game from 1999, and once you're in you can just stay in that server for ages, but getting there can be a little overwhelming. However, once you're in the game, it's fun. Playing Quake in single player and playing Quake in multiplayer are massively different experiences. As I mentioned, Quake single player isn't about accurate shooting so much as dodging what's being shot at you. This is because most of the enemies are slow whilst the player isn't. However here, you're kinda like both the enemy and the player. You need to dodge what other players are firing, but you also need to hit them, whilst they are dodging you, whilst they are trying to fire at you, whilst you need to dodge. It's kind of hard, however unlike a lot of multiplayer shooters, you can straight up have the upper hand against someone when going into a fight. There are still health and power-ups, so avoiding combat to overcharge your health or find armour can be incredibly helpful, however spend too much time preparing and others will overtake you. You want to spend as little time as possible restocking health, which means that learning maps and item placements can significantly help. However, learning the maps can also help in ways besides health due to things like quad damage and weapons. Weapons are very similar to those found in Quake 2, however the super shotgun, grenades and pistol have been removed, and the hyper blaster and chain gun, but those have been kind of replaced with the lightning gun and plasma gun. Certain weapons are just better than others. For instance, there's a fucking rapid fire BFG. However, for instance, whilst the railgun has high damage, it fires slowly, and due to player speeds, it can be tricky to hit them. The rocket launcher is also powerful, however it's slower, and so you have to predict where players are going to move. These weapons are more difficult to use. Some of the better weapons aren't harder to use, however, and so they're placed very carefully. The BFG is often very difficult to get. For instance, there's this part where you have to do a short platforming bit over lava to get it, and even then there's a spot up here with a railgun where someone could easily snipe you. Like Dead Rising, Quake 3 is one of those great games where everything's connected. It all works together to make a really fun multiplayer game with a high skill ceiling and programmer skins. I don't actually play that many multiplayer games because a lot of them seem to either be something you dedicate your life to or baby. I've played a decent amount of CSGO, but I've never been able to get into it properly because joining a competitive match feels like I'm signing a contract. On the other hand though, I like being able to easily jump into a match of Call of Duty, but all of those matches feel the same and it doesn't feel like I'm improving at all. I like Quake 3 though, it's easy to jump into a match. Wow, look at that fucking huge asterisk. It's easy to jump into a match and have fun, but also I can actually get good rather than stay okay. So there, I guess Quake 3 goes with the 3 other good multiplayer games. And in terms of giving Quake its own identity, despite having an art style more similar to Doom than any of the other games, it actually kind of feels like its own thing. As far as I can tell, Doom had a deathmatch, but it wasn't the big selling point, especially since you couldn't play it with people all over the world. However, now with its fancy IP connection and already established fanbase of people who liked the online gameplay, Quake 3 was massively popular, and when people talk about Quake, they usually mean Quake 3, meaning that despite the time it took, Quake now had its own identity. Except it didn't, did it? Unlike the previous games, Quake 4 was developed by Raven Software, who are probably best known for things like Soldier of Fortune and Hexen, but now mostly work on Call of Duty, which, I mean, is a pretty good developer for making a multiplayer focused game, but Quake 4's multiplayer is shit, so what? And you might say that they didn't have to practice working on multiplayer games since the first Call of Duty game they worked on came out after Quake 4, but Jedi Academy came out before Quake 4, so you did all that research for nothing. Quake 4's multiplayer is just Quake 3 but slower, and no one's playing it, and the servers turn the game Russian because of course they do, so it's not great. Or, I mean, it's not that bad actually.
Why are you usually bad at video games? Why are you good at this one? What video games to be actually good at?
The main focus instead went into the campaign. It's a sequel to Quake 2, with you playing as a soldier directly after the events of Quake 2. I'll be slightly spoiling Quake 4 by the way, if you care about pretty minor spoilers for a game from 2005, with little story focus, that you can get for like 75p, and isn't that long. Just play the game, what are you waiting for? You play as Kane, who is introduced as one certified badass by his hoorah military men friends. It seems like a very typical sci-fi military story, but there were a couple things that were pretty fun. Well, you start as a cool marine guy, a couple hours in you're captured and almost turned into a Strogg soldier. You're saved in time, but it leaves you looking like and having the abilities of a Strogg soldier. Because of this, other soldiers start treating you kind of differently. They judge you and say like you're a spooky bitch and stuff like that, and while some still see you as a powerful marine, but less as an inspiration and more as a tactical advantage. It doesn't feel like you're doing this job because people want you to, it feels more like they need to use what they can against an enemy they don't even understand. The story's not amazing, but it's better than the others, and I feel this is a weird situation where the graphics are carrying the tone whilst the story backs that up. This came out not long after Doom 3 and does a similar thing with its atmosphere, in that you can't see anything ever, but I feel like this is more effective. Light in areas can vary from normal to pitch black, but the complete darkness is often used to set up shootouts, rather than you going from entire levels where you can't see. A lot of the time when it's dark you can still see, it's just difficult. What adds to this is the design of the area around you. It's the Strogg space, not yours, so there's lots of technology you don't understand, and other things which are just very cool. The setting not only adds to the atmosphere but also manages to create variety from fairly samey sci-fi industrial environments in a way Quake 2 could not. These areas have a clear purpose in the Strogg base, and it feels like you're making your way for a huge complex. In fact, Quake 4 manages to fix a few of Quake 2's other issues, namely the pacing. The weapons here are the same as Quake 2, except there's a lightning gun, no super shotgun, and instead of the chain gun and BFG you get the nail gun and dark matter gun. You also get these weapons fairly quickly, but not too quick. You have enough time for it to feel exciting when you get one and to get used to it. However, since you have all the weapons not that far in, they'll also upgrade your weapons in meaningful ways. So, for example, the nail gun will get heat-seeking powers, and the rocket launcher will do that thing where you guide it with your mouse. You can still fire the weapons normally though. The upgrades only work when you hold the right mouse button, so all it's doing is adding more choice to combat without it being overwhelming. The pacing hits a nice balance where you're constantly being given more options, but you don't spend half the game feeling like you have no options. However, somehow, despite this, they still managed to replicate that amazing part of Quake 2 where the first 2 hours are really shit. You know how I mentioned that you're turned into a Strogg? Well, that has actual effects on the gameplay. It lets you access Strogg terminals, gives you 25 extra health and changes HUD, but the main change is that you move significantly faster. The gameplay is actually pretty fun once you become a Strogg. Again, it's similar to Doom 3 but with more interesting enemies. A lot of them have multiple attacks which are all dodgeable, nothing requires you to take cover apart from reloading. It's the same bullet dodging of the previous games but this time slightly slower, with the slower pace not even really being a negative. You have soldiers walking about and effort is put into making you immersed, so I don't think moving at 100 miles per hour would work here. However, moving like 2 inches per fucking millennium doesn't really work either. The speed as a Strogg is perfect for the game. The speed as a marine is too slow to dodge, you just kind of have to soak up bullets, and the game knows this, giving you plenty of health. Being a marine isn't hard, it's just boring. But that's really my main complaint, and it's gone within 2 hours, so I don't know, I like this one a lot. I actually prefer it to Quake 2 despite the more mixed reception to it. Why? I don't know. Was this supposed to be a review? It's probably mostly the atmosphere. I know I didn't say that much about it, but it does really draw you in. It's just hard to put that into words. I also don't think this is much of a black sheep as people claim. That's the thing people say in every review, it's just, oh, Quake 4, that's the different one. We don't talk about Quake 4 around these parts like it's a fucking tile matching puzzle or something. But the game still understands Quake's gameplay and it fits the lore. So, I mean, it's not as black sheep as like Doom 3. Oh, god damn it. So I don't know how this happens, but for about 6 years Quake was its own thing, but it's being compared to Doom again. Not regular Doom though, like the weird deformed child of Doom 3. And it's developed by different people, so like how does this even happen? They went back to the multiplayer focus again though, so don't cry. Don't cry. Don't cry. I've seen enemy territory Quake Wars before, but never knew anything about it. From the cover, I just assumed it was some like RTS spin-off. But then it turned out it was a multiplayer FPS, so I had to play it. But it's not on Steam or GOG, so I had to order a copy off eBay. But that means it's a disc, and who honestly has disc trays these days? No. And after all that hassle, I've got nothing to say. This game's kind of boring. It's like Battlefield or something similar with its classes and vehicles, but it's more like TF2 in its objectives. Only with a maximum of 16 players, it doesn't have the huge battlefields of and it doesn't have the spiraling class system of TF2, and it came out after both of these, so why play this? I spent a decent amount of time playing this, and in that time I found nothing to say. It's just kind of boring. Objectives don't require any clever tactics, you just shoot stuff, but that shooting isn't satisfying at all, it just feels weak. I know this review consists of 5 lines, but I really have nothing to say. Like, do you want me to talk about the graphics? This is actually footage of Haze, but you didn't know, did you? Oh, actually I like these cards I got of the game. That's about it. Despite it being like not even bad, just kinda... Quake Wars still created a slight pushback to a multiplayer focus for the Quake series, with that push leading to Quake Live and Quake Champions. Quake Live is pretty much just Quake 3 but with a higher player count, an easier to use server browser and HD, but Quake Champions, while similar to Quake 3, is its own thing, mostly due to the titular champions. You have a Strog, the Ranger, a Twitch streamer, and many others, including my favourite, the Lizard, since I'm a massive scaly. These champions are all different playable characters who all have their own unique stats and abilities, which take a short while to recharge and range from a short, highly damaging charge or a grapple hook. It would appear as an inspiration from Overwatch, however in practice it's more like Apex Legends or Rainbow Six Siege. See, in Overwatch, which character you pick is going to influence the way you play entirely. It picks the weapon you get and the abilities you have, your health, your speed, and the differences in speed and health can be pretty drastic. But with Rainbow Six, while it is going to have an effect, it won't be nearly as noticeable. In Overwatch, having Mercy go against Roadhog is most likely going to end in Mercy's death, so instead, when you pick Mercy, you play her as a support character like you were told to. Whilst in Rainbow Six, Ashe against Twitch could go either way because their differences are much less extreme than in Overwatch. Quake Champions is on the Rainbow Six side of these two, whilst having slightly differing health, armour and speed. Where Quake Champions is different from both of these, however, is that it's much less team-based. There are team-based modes, but they're just as much of a main mode as free-for-all or insta-gib. So a support class like Mercy wouldn't even really fit most of the time, but they still included one, and people still play her, and I don't really know why. Most of the abilities are attack based however. For example, the Doomslayer goes into a sort of melee berserk mode, and the Death Knight shoots free fireballs. I think the most interesting abilities though are the ones that affect your movement, like Athena's grapple hook or the Ranger's dire orb, which lets them teleport. These affect the way you play the game significantly more than the attack based abilities, since these open up more possibilities for traversing the map, whilst the attack based abilities can sometimes just feel like temporary buffs. Like, for example, the Doomslayer has the Berserk mode I mentioned, which just lets you jump close to someone for a few easy kills. It obviously affects the way you play a bit, but he also has a double jump exclusive to him, and this double jump can frequently be used to get to part of the map much quicker than others. Places that would have you going down a certain path to get to usually can just be jumped to, which impacts the way you play much more than the temporary Berserk ability. The champions are a fun addition, and whilst they don't change the game completely, they change it enough to feel like a unique thing for this game. But if they're not that game changing, then why did I talk about them for so long? Because it's Quake, innit? It's the same core gameplay just with different maps, these new champions, and graphics which I think do a great job of recreating Quake's free style with just a bit more visual variety, and I feel a little more of a gothic influence. But that's what this is, it's a recreation with just a bit more. And while this does have some issues like a lack of maps and long wait times to get into matches both for matchmaking and loading, I still recommend it over Quake 3 in 2019. It gets made fun of for being dead, but it's easier to find a match than Quake 3, and there's definitely enough people playing. This is coming from someone who thinks that like 100 players is enough, but I'm gonna keep playing Quake Champions.
There's no such thing as a good lie.
If you'd rather play Quake 4 though, I get that, it's really good.
I shot you. Right, no chat. This is going to be the worst gameplay in the world.
But that's it. Despite Quake's difficulty finding its feet and then the screaming once it did, Quake is now known as pretty much the start of online FPS games, which it isn't that niche of a genre. So what have we learned? Well, even if you have trouble working out who you are, it doesn't make your identity any less valid once you discover it, whatever your identity means. Okay, look, I'm just gonna be honest, that has nothing to do with the video, I just made it up on the spot, but like, I've been speaking for about half an hour here, and I feel like I need some, like, 20-minute outro to, like, just explain myself, but I don't have anything to say. I just wanted to talk about Quake games, so I'm stuck in this corner now, and I don't know how to end this video. I really don't. Please, someone email me the end of this script, because I'm stuck.
Find a place to scream. Find a quiet, comfy little place to sleep. Find a place to scream. Find a quiet, comfy little place to sleep. I don't think I'll ever live to see a prophet. I don't want to be a locket clinging to a chest till the last breath.